years after D-Day, a poignant tribute.
Thank you for our freedom, and thank you for your service.
Honoring the thousands of Canadians who volunteered to go to war and those who made the trip here one last time. Also on this Thursday night from Juno Beach, eternal gratitude, Canada's monumental contribution to liberating France.
We were absolutely free.
And the fears of what could happen if history is forgotten.
Here in Canada, an emergency alert for Calgary. What's behind its major water woes and why it's a warning to other cities. And the MPs who allegedly colluded with foreign states, why they likely would never be charged, and why Canada's public safety minister says identifying them would be irresponsible.
Global National with Dawna Friesen, reporting tonight from Juno Beach in France.
As the sun sets over the beaches of Normandy, France, this June 6, 2024, it is calm and peaceful, exactly what Allied forces, including Canadians, fought and died for here 80 years ago. Good evening and thanks for joining us. What took place here changed the course of history, liberating Western Europe from Nazi domination, fighting for the freedoms we still cherish. And this may be the most poignant and powerful D-Day commemoration ever to take place here. At dawn, U.S. Navy SEALs emerged from the water at Utah Beach. British Royal Marines waded into Gold Beach as a lone military piper played. And French troops arrived on Omaha Beach at the exact moment when 80 years ago, the largest amphibious invasion in history happened. Those at the center of the ceremonies today were the veterans still with us who lived through D-Day. They realize this is likely their last journey here. Their ranks are dwindling. Most of them are 100 years old or older, and were in their late teens and 20s when they fought here.
Standing here today in peaceful silence, it is almost impossible to grasp the courage it would have taken to run into the fury of battle that very day.
20 heads of state and world leaders came to Normandy too, including the president of Ukraine. We'll get to the international ceremony in just a moment, but first, Crystal Goomansingh on the Canadian commemoration here at Juno Beach.
Dynamic and patriotic maneuvers by Canadian Forces Skyhawks above Juno Beach, landing on golden sand dunes where those who came before them crashed up against occupying German forces.
There are no words to describe the immensity of the debt we owe you.
From the stage, Prime Minister Justin Trudeau paid personal tribute to several of the veterans, including Bill Cameron, who was packed and ready to travel to France for the anniversary. He died 8 hours before he was due to leave.
His daughter Dawna told me just how much he'd been looking forward to being here with all of you. So for him and for all the veterans, I can promise you that Canada and the world will keep commemorating this significant day for decades and generations to come.
With so few veterans of the Second World War still alive, those who did make it back to Normandy were showered with respect and admiration. Prince William shaking hands with veterans and often not letting go as he listened intently to their stories.
We continue to honor every Canadian who gave so much. Every Canadian family who lost a loved one. Every Canadian who lived with the scars of battle, both physical and mental.
On D-Day, roughly 14,000 young Canadians landed on the beach. 359 were killed in action that first day. For the 80th anniversary of that historic and successful Allied operation, a multi-generational, multicultural expression of gratitude.
We remember the courage of many men and women.
The fight for freedom and democracy has not ended, and Canadians are still at the forefront.
So carry me home down the highway of heroes.
A message some may have recognized with the song Highway of Heroes, a reference to a stretch of Ontario's 401 where funeral processions carried soldiers killed in Afghanistan home. The song played this time on a stage in France with vows to remember the ultimate sacrifice. Crystal Goomansingh, Global News, London.
There was a much larger international ceremony in Normandy, too, a moment for world leaders to reflect on the past at a time when war is on Europe's doorstep. This ceremony took place on Omaha Beach, where American forces landed.
What a pleasure to meet you, sir.
Some of the veterans who were able to make the trip back to these once blood-stained shores were awarded France's highest honor.
Nous vous faisons chevalier de la Légion d'honneur. We thank all the veterans being present here, and I just want to express the gratitude of the French people.
Russia was an ally 80 years ago. This year, the Russian president was not invited. Instead, Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky was there, a man who knows what it means to defend a nation against aggression, something U.S. President Joe Biden acknowledged at an earlier ceremony.
We know the dark forces that these heroes fought against 80 years ago. They never fade. We see one stark example. Ukraine has been invaded by a tyrant.
King Charles also spoke today about the duty to remember the bravery of soldiers who replaced tyranny with freedom.
Very many of them never came home. It is with the most profound sense of gratitude that we remember them.
Being here in Normandy really brings the enormity of D-Day home, what was gained and who was lost. The military strategy is well known now, but what gets discussed less often is why the young men fought. The 14,000 Canadians who were part of the Normandy invasion were all volunteers. They weren't conscripted. They chose to go to war. This is why William Wilson wanted to come back to Normandy one last time, to say goodbye to fellow Canadian soldiers who didn't live to see the liberation they gave their lives for.
They were young, like I was. Like we all were, really.
Why do you think it is important to keep telling the stories?
Those kids volunteered, got themselves killed for a definite purpose. They'd been blind. What would they have thought? 80 years later, that nobody would remember what they did.
What they did seemed an almost impossible feat, and yet victory was the only option. In June 1944, the war had been going on for almost 5 years, and the Nazis dominated Europe.
Evil prevails when good people do nothing. Doing something requires enormous effort extended over vast sums of money, time, and treasure, unfortunately bodies. And if you don't hang together, you'll hang separately.
I spoke with Rolly Armitage in Ottawa. He's 99 now. He enlisted when he was just 17. He was part of the second wave to land on Juno Beach.
Lots of people have said, what's it like there? So I invented a new terminology. Look, I got my feet wet and I wasn't welcome.
He laughs, but it's just his way to avoid talking about the pain and the loss. Did you lose any of your friends?
Oh, yes. We lost a lot of people from the day we landed, every day almost. Some your best friend, and but you got cold about it. You got to move on. You can't do one thing to help them. You want to go back right away to help them. Or you move on.
And he still vividly recalls the words of his training sergeant.
We teach you to kill, and we teach you not to get killed.
In fact, his commanding officer was one of those killed. Rolly has never forgotten, and he still treasures a jar of sand from Juno Beach. The cemeteries where so many are buried, a stark reminder that freedom is not free. I'll be back from Normandy a little later. The welcome that Canadians get here is really quite astonishing because people in Normandy work hard to keep the memories alive. But first, Farah Nasser has the rest of the day's news. Farah.
Thanks, Dawna. There are growing calls for the federal government to release names and details after an intelligence watchdog said some members of parliament wittingly assisted efforts of foreign states to meddle in Canadian politics. David Akin reports.
Minister, this is about as serious as it gets, that we have members of parliament working for hostile foreign states. You won't release the names.
Conservative MPs were doing their best to convince Public Safety Minister Dominic LeBlanc to divulge the names of elected officials that a watchdog all-party committee of MPs said wittingly colluded with foreign powers.
This places a cloud of suspicion over every single member of the House.
But LeBlanc refused to provide the names, saying, among other things, that the intelligence that identified those elected officials might be flawed.
So the idea that there's a perfect list of names that is entirely reliable that should be released to the public is simply irresponsible.
Or the names might have surfaced from foreign sources who place restrictions or caveats on how intelligence might be used.
And so often it's not able to be revealed publicly because of caveats and an inability to use that in some of our judicial processes.
And yet, if those individuals remain nameless, and if there is no sanction for their alleged activity, foreign state actors are likely to continue interference activities.
One of the most important elements for foreign actors is when they look at us, and if they see there's not enough consequences for their activities, they will be emboldened to do more.
In fact, CSIS and the RCMP said today that even if these elected officials could be publicly identified, current laws on colluding with foreign governments would make it almost impossible to charge them. Farah.
David Akin in Ottawa. Thank you, David. Calgary's issued a critical water supply alert after the largest water main break in recent memory caused city water levels to drop dangerously low. As Heather Yerkes-West explains, experts say this should serve as a wake-up call for communities across the country.
The alarm went off just after 6:30, waking up many Calgarians with an ask to skip the morning shower, the city facing a critical water supply alert.
I know this is an inconvenience, but I can't overstate the importance of this request. We have a need to urgently ensure that our water supply does not get dangerously low.
This is why a massive water main break Wednesday night, flooding parts of the Trans-Canada Highway. By morning, the full extent of the break's impact became clear.
The break is on one of our critical pipes. It's called a feeder main, and it enables us to move water across the city.
The city says its priority is making sure there is enough water in the event of an emergency. A citywide fire ban is in effect as well.
We've known for a while that our infrastructure investments in the water sector have not kept pace with needs.
Those who study Canada's water systems say the emergency in Calgary should alert other municipalities of potential danger ahead as infrastructure continues to age.
So, for example, between 2017 and 2021 across the prairies, investments were short about $3 billion.
The city is calling this a complicated repair and asking residents to be patient, warning water restrictions could be in place for some time. Farah?
Heather Yerkes-West in Calgary. Thanks, Heather. A suspected human smuggling ring. Coming up, the new arrests in an RCMP investigation dating back more than a year. In Ontario, RCMP announced 8 suspects are facing charges related to a suspected human smuggling ring involving more than 100 migrants.
For a little over a year, investigators delved into the inner workings of a complex and well-organized human smuggling network that consisted of dozens of people across a number of jurisdictions, including Canada, the United States, the Akwesasne Territory, and abroad.
RCMP say 4 suspects are in custody and arrest warrants have been issued for 4 others. The group allegedly smuggled people between July 2022 and June 2023, charging them thousands of dollars to cross the Canada-US border using the St. Lawrence River. The group is linked to the deaths of 8 migrants, including 2 children last spring. They died after their boat capsized on the river. A report out today on how the RCMP handled the 2022 mass killing and manhunt on a Saskatchewan First Nation and neighboring community says there were communication issues, but nothing that significantly affected the outcome. The report does provide areas for improvement.
The team identified 36 recommendations to be considered, ways that we, as a police service, can improve our operations.
The recommendations include more community outreach, better command structures, and equipment upgrades. In September 2022, Miles Sanderson killed 11 people and injured 17 others on the James Smith Cree Nation, a nearby community of Weldon. He was arrested 3 days later and died of a cocaine overdose while in police custody. More grief in Gaza. Still ahead, the deadly Israeli strike on a school where thousands were sheltering. In Gaza, dozens of people are dead after Israeli planes hit a packed UN school where thousands of people were taking shelter and sleeping. Israel claims it was targeting Hamas militants. And as Jackson Prosco reports, the attack is hampering efforts to reach a ceasefire.
Horror rained down from the sky in central Gaza as an Israeli airstrike hit a school where up to 6,000 people were sheltering, according to the United Nations Agency for Palestinian Refugees. We were sleeping when we suddenly saw a rocket falling on us, says this witness. Palestinian authorities say at least 40 people were killed, including children.
It's just another horrific example of the price that civilians are paying.
The IDF confirms it carried out the strike, but said it was not aware of civilian casualties. The Israelis claim they were targeting a Hamas compound operating inside the school and accuse Hamas of deliberately using UN facilities.
This war needs to end. Too many people are dying. There is too much suffering.
This latest strike has surely complicated efforts to end the conflict. A US-backed ceasefire plan remains stalled. Hamas has said it will not agree to a deal unless Israel commits to total and permanent withdrawal from Gaza. A joint statement from the leaders of 17 countries, including the U.S. and Canada, called on Hamas to close this agreement that Israel is ready to move forward with.
We think this is should be an urgent priority to get this ceasefire over the line to start to alleviate the suffering that is happening.
Visiting with military commanders, Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu vowed to fight on multiple fronts, saying his country is striving for total victory despite international pressure. Jackson Prosco, Global News, Washington.
Next, how Normandy is remembering Canadian veterans for their courage and sacrifice on D-Day. And today in Moncton, people gathered to honor and remember the role soldiers, especially those from Atlantic Canada, played on D-Day. Dawna will be back from Normandy next.
Welcome back to Normandy. Even after 80 years, you can feel the gratitude here. People in Normandy have not forgotten the significance of what Canadian and Allied forces did for them, of what it was like to be liberated. In Normandy, France, they are not shy about showing their gratitude to Canada. They commemorate it with music, with flags. There are more Canadian flags here than French, and by keeping memories alive.
Ça, c'était mon village.
Thérèse Le Chevalier was 15 on June 6, 1944.
We had a very frightful night, of course, with the shelling going on from midnight to 6 o'clock. And at 6 o'clock, we were in a trench that my father had dug out in the back of our yard.
It was D-Day, the enormous Allied invasion of northern France. 14,000 Canadian forces among the waves of troops landing on the beaches and parachuting into French villages.
We rushed to the street. What we saw was absolutely amazing, or, well, incredible, because there was a stream of tanks and jeeps and of course plenty of soldiers.
The goal of the soldiers was to quickly move inland, liberating French villages from the Nazis. 2,500 civilians were killed in Normandy, including 17 in Thérèse Le Chevalier's village. When the Canadians got there, she says everyone felt the same thing.
We were alive, and the joy of being liberated. We were free.
That day, Canadian forces managed to move more than 14 kilometers inland, further than any of the allies they were fighting alongside. That day is woven into Colette Legaouy's memory too. She was 8 on D-Day. We still owe them our freedom, she tells me. It's something that is ingrained in us. And the risk in forgetting, she says, is that history could repeat. The danger is that it might happen again, she says. Now is a frightening time. I'm afraid for the future, afraid our children will see war again. And so the people here make a point to celebrate their liberation and tell their children why it matters. I am here because I have 2 little girls, this woman tells me, and they need to hear the stories and know what Canadian soldiers sacrificed for people here. As first-hand memories fade, the next generation in Normandy doing all they can to keep them alive. Memory is about looking to the past, but it's also an act of creation and continuity. And among the guests at the ceremony at Juno Beach were 850 Canadian high school students. They've been part of a group traveling across Europe, learning about Canada's contribution and sacrifice in the Second World War.
Coming here has definitely taught me a lot about, the history of it.
After the ceremony, they walked along a stretch of Juno Beach.
It's unbelievable to walk on the beaches where it all happened.
A powerful place to reflect on the past and think about the kind of future they want to build. That is Global National for this Thursday, June 6th. I'm Dawna Friesen. Thanks for watching.